And thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Dr. Kevin Browning, and I am the Director for the Center for Professional Development. Let me go ahead and see if I can share my content with you guys. PowerPoint up and running. Right. Okay, well, like I said, my name is Dr. Kevin Browning, and this morning we're for the SDI, we're going to be talking about adapting to change. And as we get started on this, I just want you to kind of look at things from a different perspective when we talk about change. You know, a lot of organizations have departments of change management and so forth and so on. But what we're really looking for in this particular training, and what I'm going to show you some tools and some resources of looking at it inwardly, looking at it from a self-development, professional development side. I'm going to call out a couple of key phrases as we go through some of the PowerPoints slides, and hopefully they'll build on one another and you kind of see the connection with everything. Just as an FYI, Brandy's going to go ahead and have everyone muted for the time being. There will be a time for questions and question and answers at the end of the presentation, as well as if you want to pop something into the chat room during the presentation, we can come back and review that once we get to the end. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and jump into things. And just kind of start off with this quote. You know, there's a lot of things about change out there. You know, we could always say, well, the one constant thing is change, or change is inevitable, and it really kind of is. So we're not going to harbor too much on that or camp out too much on that particular topic. But what we really want to talk about is that, you know, it's really the fear of the unknown that may have you react adversely to change. But if you learn to anticipate and even embrace change, you'll find that adapting to change is actually a great skill to master. We're going to talk about some of those skills, and we're going to talk about ways to anticipate and even embrace some of the changes that's going to be coming forward. But the key thing here is anticipation. Because that's something that we have to look at internally and be able to deal with some of our own emotions toward change, some of our own process resolutions, things that we go through individually when it comes to change. So we really want to kind of be able to look ahead and see the bigger picture when it does come to change and how it impacts us individually, departmentally, and as an institution. Again, change in the workplace is actually a good thing. A lot of people don't realize that or are a little uncomfortable with that, but change is really essential to the business cycle of any organization. Otherwise, you become stagnant, you stay where you are, you're not adapting to the trends, you're not meeting the needs of your customer base, you're not meeting the needs of the community, or in our case, the industry needs, what the programs need to look like, how they need to align. So organizations need to change and create innovation in order to grow. Through that, it's key that we understand that businesses thrive when they embrace change, but the same holds true for individuals, for our employees, our staff, our faculty, that adapting work styles in response to changes in that work environment actually creates a very valuable, not only coworker and team member, but you as become and add value to our institution and to our organization. So it's crucial that we embrace change and adapt to change. Now, I found this very interesting that some of the top 10 sources of workplace stress, when you look at it, number 3 is change. Believe it or not, even though it's a constant thing, people walk into it understanding that there will be change in an organization. You look at some of these other things, though, that too much to do at one time, interruptions, mistrust, unclear policies, lack of feedback, appreciation, communication. The ironic thing when I look at this list, all those other things can be addressed, but they have to be addressed through change. Change comes with the policies, change comes with providing feedback. All of these type of situations require change, but that also creates stress in and of itself. So I would venture to say that everyone on this call at some point in time, probably when you interviewed for the position that you're in now, I know that I've gone through some of these questions. I've asked some of these questions. I've had them been asked to me. I've served on committees where they've been asked, but almost every interview involves a question, at least one, regarding change. Examples of how do you handle change? How adaptable are you to change? Tell me about a time when you experienced a major change in your normal work practice. Tell me about a time when you were opposed to change and how did you handle that? Tell me about a time when you embraced change, but others were reluctant. How did you handle that? How did you ever lead change? Have you ever led change management initiatives? And how do you adjust to changes you have no control over? So I just want to kind of pause here just for a second and have everyone just do an internal kind of reflection on how you might answer some of these questions if you were interviewing for a position today or your existing position, knowing that there's changes on the horizon for SLCC. We've gone through changes this past year. There's still going to be changes coming up. If you were to answer some of these questions, what would that look like to you regarding change? How do you really feel about it? Or what would you say to that hiring manager? Some of the common sample answers or responses would be, I think I excel in new and challenging situations. I've never been one of the to be daunted by unexpected issues because I remain calm to find better solutions. I enjoy getting to know new colleagues and settle into an organization's methodology fairly quickly. These are answers that we think everyone wants to hear. These are answers that we think that hiring manager wants to know because change is inevitable in any institution. What we probably really want to say is something like this. Well, I really don't like change. It freaks me out. Change makes me uncomfortable. I like consistency. I don't like being interrupted. I hate getting outside of my comfort zone. Or, what if we just don't do anything and something magical happens? The reality is that's what we might want to say, but that's not what is going to happen or what we need to be able to, our attitude. So sometimes we say things, but we don't really mean them. And that's kind of what maybe we're going to tap into a little bit today. Really tapping in and understanding the reactions that you guys have to change and that everyone has to change. From both the manager leader aspect as well as a direct report, manager, any staff, faculty, from every level, everyone responds to change at a different pace and a different way. So that's one thing as we go through some of these change models and begin to look at some of these things. Keep in mind that there is no magical time frame that you should be in one stage or the next. Everyone moves based on their own experiences, what they bring to the table, and that's okay. The point being that we need to address the change. How fast you get there really is kind of up to you and your leader, how well you communicate to get you through some of these processes. I love this saying that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And that's crucial. We have to be able to come to a point when we're faced with change of letting go of feelings that we may have associated with the old way of doing things. Because in the reality is our comfort zones and our comfort level with what we've accustomed to are really more emotional than rational. So just remember that you're constantly adaptable to growth, but that does come out of discomfort and forces us out of our comfort zone into new situations, into new processes, into new org structures, into everything that may happen down the road for us. So it's how we respond to it and really kind of tapping into our emotional responses with this versus what really is happening with the change. Just to throw out some examples for changes that we've gone through and will go through, naturally this past year, COVID has impacted the way that we were working remote. We were thrust into that. Our classroom management structures. Some of us are now returning to work on a more regular basis. So what that's going to look like. Those kind of constant rollouts. We also have had some leadership changes. If you're not on mute, can you please make sure that you put yourself on mute? Or Brandy, can you look and see that for me?
So somebody in the bathroom right now? I'll go right now. Hold on.
Can we please check and make sure you're on mute? Thank you. So some of the things that we've gone through, we'll go through, leadership changes. This past year, we've had a new chancellor. There's some dean positions that are open. There's some leadership things that are taking place and some changes with that. Just the restructuring of some situations. We're working on our upcoming 21-25 strategic plan. So we're not quite sure what that rollout is going to look like and what some of those initiatives will be and how that will impact change in our overall structure. We do know that some of that will be impacted by Dr. June's presentation that he gave last week regarding the reimagining of SLCC. In that, he clearly stated there was going to be some shifts in some org structures, some changes in some programs, making sure that we're aligning with the industry needs and community needs. So that's out there. Again, what that looks like, he kind of talked about it on a broader spectrum. We don't know exactly what's going to take place with that, but that does indicate that change is coming. We have a rebranding campaign that's in the process of being worked out. Again, there'll be some changes with that. So all of that, and these are just a few things that came to my mind with that of some high level major impacts that will happen to us. So we need to be able to handle the changes and be able to address some of that, anticipate. Again, we talked about anticipating. This is the first step. We've been given a heads up. We kind of know that changes are coming, so we need to be able to prepare ourselves. Most people view change as something that's going to impair them rather than enable them for unseen opportunities that they can't see right now. But what they fail to realize is that change is one of the most powerful professional development tools available to them. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. As you anticipate change, you can expect change. We know it's going to happen. Embrace it as a professional development opportunity with some of the skills that we'll talk about and be able to work through. In Dr. June's presentation last week, he did talk specifically about professional development and what that's going to look like in this new overall structure. So this is the opportunity to really kind of tap into some of those tools, some of those resources that we have. So keep that in mind as we go through this. It's really about professional development as an individual and presenting ourselves as a tool and a resource and an asset to the organization. Which ties into, at the end of the day, we cannot control the change. Change is going to happen. It's going to be there. But what we can control is our attitude towards that change. As we've already talked about, being able to anticipate and work through some of this and understanding that it's our reactions to it and what that will look like. So a common model, and this is, there's several of them out there. I chose this one because it ties in nicely with another model that I'll show you in a few minutes. But this is a model of understanding change, and based on the change model, of really kind of focuses on based on the 5 stages of grief, the Kubler-Ross change curve. The stages of this curve don't necessarily follow one after the other, depending on where you're at with this, but they tend to. In the session yesterday, someone was talking about, well, I kind of embrace change. I kind of skip through the deny piece and go straight to reacting and exploring, and that's fine. It's not saying you have to go through all these. These are just a general trend that we see in changes. And even though you may look after you leave this presentation and this session, you may look at different change models. The name of each stage may vary a little bit, but the interpretation, but the process is pretty much the same in that. And everyone is going to move through these in different stages and different time frames. So when we look at the first stage of denying and ignore, when a change first comes to us, we really want to kind of focus on how good things were here in the past. And we think, oh, they don't really mean it. These changes aren't going to happen. It's going to happen in other departments. It's not going to really influence me. There's a kind of that everything as usual attitude. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to listen to the new information. We'll see how this really kind of falls out, but I don't think it's going to happen. Reality, though, is when the change is introduced, we really cannot deny it forever, and we're forced to face the reality. A lot of times that's even before we'd like to. So that means typically this deny stage is the shortest of all the processes because we're kind of forced into the change at some point. Again, whether we like it or not. Going in with the deny stage in which change first comes to us, our first reaction a lot of times is shock. A reaction to that, how dare they challenge what's going on? How they don't really know my department. They don't understand what's happening. Let's leave it alone kind of mentality. Even if the plan has been well planned and communication has gone out, there's still that resistance. There's still that shock of, no, this is not going to happen. And as a result, as we're kind of going through those changes, a lot of times there's a slowdown and loss of productivity in departments and individuals. The shock is typically due to maybe a lack of information, fear of the unknown, but a lot of times there's a fear of looking stupid or doing something wrong with it, because sometimes we're just not aware of what exactly the change will entail. And we may have been given some glimpses of things and are fearful of what those new skills may look like for us. And maybe we're not exactly up to speed with where we need to be on that. Again, that's okay. Leadership kind of understands that. And that's why we're going through a lot of this, because leadership needs to understand the connection of their staff, their employees, and what the change model really looks like and how they can coach everyone through this. But also keep in mind, your leaders are going through a lot of this at the same time you are. So it's really a partnership and a teamwork working through any sort of change model or change initiative. From there, going into denial, again, the focus really tends to be on the past. There's that feeling of everything was okay. Why does it need to change? Like fear of failure. Why are we challenging what's going on? There's a common occurrence where people try to convince themselves that the change isn't actually going to happen, or that if it does, it doesn't in fact affect me. For example, it's going to happen in such and such department, or that's going to happen at a higher level. It's really not going to flow down, but it will. And change happens at every level in some form or fashion. It will flow down and impact each department. A lot of times, folks just carry on as if as they always have, and denying communications about some of the changes and making excuses as to why they can't participate in the forward planning. This all kind of takes place at that deny stage, which is a lot of information, but keep in mind it's also the shortest stage because we're kind of forced into that piece. So then once the change is out there and really kind of beginning to work through our systems, we move into the resist or the reaction stage, where there's some anger, there's loss and hurt feelings going on, there's stubbornness, there's a blaming of others and complaining about the change or the situation, sometimes the tiniest things. There's also some physical time impacts and influences, such as getting sick due to anxiety or different other emotional responses to the change. And again, a lot of it deals with doubting your ability and doubting that you're going to be successful with this change. Through this is when the reality of this change really starts to hit. This is when folks begin to look at a scapegoat for the reason for the change. It's like, okay, well, it's the organization, it's LCTCS is changing this, it's our economy, it's due to COVID, it's the new chancellor, it's the new dean, it's something's going on, but we have to point a finger and find a reason for the change, other than accepting that, again, as we talked about early on, it's really just part of the business model, and it's good for the organization to change, whoever initiated that or for whatever reason. The reason when there's a blaming of someone or that scapegoat, it sometimes allows for the continuation of denial. Well, this is going to be a short-lived, or that person's going to fizzle out, or they're not really going to follow through, which leads to suspicion, skepticism, and frustration with everything. Morale is low at that point. And there's a lot of self-doubt and anxiety levels are beginning to peak. Again, some folks are going to wrongly fear the negative consequences of the change. They're going to go immediately to, this will never work because. They're going to find out and take one little piece and begin to pick it apart. And that tendency to focus on those issues and problems, those small things that are sometimes associated when you implement change, lead to venting of anger and express feelings and concerns regarding the change, and sometimes even continuing to resist it, either actively or passively with that. An example may be, and this is a smaller example, but it wasn't long ago, teams was being pushed. We need to work teams, we need to work teams. a lot of people are unfortunately are uncomfortable working in teams and still continuing to use other meeting forms and other avenues. And well, there's going to be a time where it's going to be, this is it, no further. So there's still some resistance to certain things and changes. You know, individuals during this phase still tend to continue to perform their tasks, processes, chain of command, and and such items the same as before. It's like, I'm not going to give in to that. I'm still going to do what I want to do the way I need to do it. So the good thing about this is that this resistance and reaction stage is typically the lowest point of this change curve. And this is when anger begins to wear off and the realization that the change is genuine. It's going to be around. It's going to happen. And it means that we need to really begin to accept the reality, even if we don't like it, even if we're not ready for it. It's here. We've got to move forward. And if you'll see, that's where the curve starts to kind of dip up now into the explore area, the explore phase of seeing more possibilities now. You start to look for clarifying goals, talking with your leaders, with leadership about what does this mean for me? You know, what are my goals now? How's my job changed? How is it going to impact our department? You start exploring what resources are out there that's been associated with the change, what's been provided. You know, I can pretty much guarantee if a major change rolls out, there's going to be some supporting documentation and resources and things available to you as a staff member, as a leader, that will assist us through this change. This is where we start kind of exploring different alternatives and look different options for the way that we or the way that things have changed for us now individually and in our job descriptions. And that may mean learning new skills in order to combat some of those challenges. This level is that turning point as individuals, as we saw that it begins to swing up. So it's a more optimistic and enthusiastic level, again, because the change is there and we have to embrace it. So we're now moving to a different level. We're engaging in the situation now. We're having to use some of those tools. We're having to use some of those resources. This is where we start to accept that change and begin to work within the changes, and we work within the resources, work within the structure of the change rather than against it. Where maybe in the former model, former section, we were still using old processes, old ways of doing things. Now we're kind of working where we're starting to explore what really is out there for us. This is also a great time as employees, as staff members, and as leaders to get creative and test out new ideas and behaviors. Start looking at new possibilities of how you can impact the change and how you can positively influence what's going on. But it's also still that uneasy, that fragile stage, even though there's more enthusiasm and it's a turning point. We're still a little confused as we steer away from and replace that familiar information and processes with new ways of doing things. So that's okay. It's good, but we're on the upswing with that. Just make sure that we're seeking guidance and asking questions about the changes as things move forward. We may still resist some a little bit by really kind of only focusing on what we think is important. There again, that's why you want to reach out and find out what are the goals for my department, me individually, where are we headed with this, see and talk to your leader about what exactly is important at this stage as we make some of these transitions. We also tend to find that during this stage, because we're exploring new things and new options, that although productivity is not 100% and not where it should be, it is improving. We've made that curve, we've made that upswing, we've made that turning point. So now that we start to see some productivity beginning to improve with that. Then we move into the final stage of committing. Where, it's here where we determine, okay, where it's happened, it's going forward. Where am I headed with this? Where's the institution headed with this? What exactly is taking place with this? We get more focused. We start working with more teams to implement some of the changes and kind of figure out there's more cooperation, there's more collaboration. There's more of a sharing of resources, and there's more balance begins to settle in our individual departments. So this is the stage that we're kind of really fully integrated into the change, and we're moving into it's now part of our culture, it's now part of our organizational structure, and things should be trending up to a more productive, positive spin. So again, we kind of accept the change, we accept the situation, being positive about it. It now becomes second nature as we integrated some of the organizational structures and changes. More feelings now include acceptance, hope, and trust, and focus on the future, that there's a sense that now real progress can be made as we move into that stage. So I want to pause here for a second and talk about change versus transition. And this is where some of the previous slides that we talked about of anticipating change and adapting to the change, identifying some of the situations, professional development portions of it, being able to, we can't control the change, but we can control what our attitude is toward it. There's a difference between change and transition. And when faced with change, as individuals for our professional development side, and to really kind of tap into becoming that valuable asset to our organization, we need to focus on the transition piece of this. Change in and of itself is defined as situations and occurrences that impact organizations and individuals. It creates the need to move away from things that used to be to the way things are now, such as possibly a new boss, a new leader, the work from home environment, or an overall shift in policy. Change requires adaptability and resilience, which ties nicely with being able to identify and address some of those things. We'll talk about adaptability and resilience in a second. But change focuses on the execution of initiatives and the well-defined shift in the way things work or are structured. Where transition is the internal psychological process of adapting to the new situation, the change. Transition can happen slowly or quickly. It is a process of moving successfully from old to the new. The overall goal of transition is not just to execute the change, but to reinvent the organization and discover a new and revised business model based on a vision for the future. So when you look at a lot of this, talk about transition, it ties in nicely again with Dr. June and what he mentioned in his presentation about reimagining SLCC. There's a transition happening of the organization as a whole. There are changes that happen and we respond to that, but there's also the transition that happens internally as an employee, as a staff member, as a faculty member, as a leader that propels us to that next level of the organization. So again, we cannot necessarily control the change that's talked about here, the situation, the actual implementation, but we can control our attitude and the transition piece of it that we can individually go through. A little bit more about that. Again, change is the shift, transition is the process. Change is the external part, transition is internal. Change refers to organizational, where transition is going to talk about more personal. Change is typically implemented quicker, where transition takes a little bit more time. It's a little slower. Change is more visible. Transition is less visible. Change is more predictable. Transition is less predictable. Again, change is more physical, where transition is psychological. Change is tangible. Transition is intangible. So you kind of see the difference there a little bit. We're talking about change. There is change that's going to happen. We cannot focus on that change because we can't necessarily control the change. It's fine to feel those emotions as we go through it. It's fine to feel some of that, but we need to tie that to the transition piece within us and how we adapt, how we address the actual change itself. And those are two different things. So I wanted to introduce this model now as the bridges transition model, where it focuses on an ending and a losing and letting go, a neutral zone, and then a new beginning. And I wanted to do a comparison and similarities of these two models. So you see up top, that black box, that's the one we just talked about. But you also see at the bottom, the bridges transition models. You see how the curves are very similar of what you're going through. At the beginning, and you'll notice in the green box, you're talking about morale and then the time that it takes to deal with some of that. So that ending is the letting go and managing loss of what will no longer be. Managing loss, again, is part of that transition piece with us. The neutral part is loss between the old and the new. It's a psychological realignment, and that's what starts to take place during that period. And then your new beginnings, or the new identities and values, emerge, and energy begins to return. You look at that gray box, talks about the endings, the neutral zones, the new beginnings. Again, these curves follow what we talked about earlier. You still have some of the same feelings internally. You're shocked, you're angry, you're in denial, you're fearful, you're sad. In the neutral zone, we're still a little confused and disoriented because we're not sure what starts and what ends, and where that is. You're still skeptical. And the new beginnings, then we begin to get a little more committed and energized and excited about what's going on. So it's okay to have some of these feelings and these things that's going on within it, because that's a good thing. It's that professional development. It's stretching out of our comfort zone. It's moving us and having us recognize and anticipate some of these changes so that we can therefore address them internally and transition ourselves. And because it's all about how we approach these changes. Looking at a little more information about that on the bridges is, again, focusing on the personal side. You see the stages there again. It's we acknowledge that we're letting go of something, for example, in stage one, when we recognize that we've lost something. An example there is changing your job, even if it's your choice. And I'm not talking about maybe leaving SLCC. I mean, it could be. This is changes as a whole. But even if you move from one department to another, or you go to a new level or a new position, there is still some sort of loss that takes place with that growth, with that change that you're occurring. It may be losing those close work friends in that department, or having to let go of those old policies as you move to a transition somewhere else. Whatever that be, that is an ending to something. And then we move into the neutral zone where we're, again, the old is not quite finished, but the new isn't there yet. We're still kind of in flux with that, and kind of things are still confusing and disorderly. The example here is moving into a new house. I'm sure we've all moved into a new place at some point, and everything's just kind of in a disarray. Those first few days or even months after moving in, it's still not quite home yet. There's boxes everywhere. There's things you still can't find, and it takes a while to settle down the turmoil. I recently underwent a major renovation in my home, and everything was in storage, and we moved back in. And it took me a minute. I was excited. We got things put up. But after we lived in it for a week or two, I was like, yeah, that's not going to work in that cabinet in the kitchen. We need to move that closer to the stove, or we need to do different things. And that's where it's still, you're not quite settled. It takes a while. And that's why that neutral zone was a little bit bigger with change, because it was kind of all these different emotions where the start hasn't really started yet, but we're seeing it happen, and we're kind of getting close to it. And then the final stage is, again, when the new things really begin to feel comfortable, right, and the only way. And the example that was provided here was having a baby. After a few months in the neutral zone of turmoil, you come to that stage where you cannot imagine any other life without that child and without that baby in your life and the things that are going on. It becomes settled, it becomes new, it becomes refreshed, it becomes normal, and it becomes exciting. So some of the factors we need to realize regarding the speed of this, as we talked about, as far as you go through some of these changes and some of these curves, is the one thing that we all have in common is that for every change, we do have a transition that happens. Now, the difference is the speed at which we go through. As we talked, it's okay to hang out in certain levels and not quite move. That's where your leadership comes into play, and working with you on the professional development level of how can we move you forward in this? How can we get you to that next level? Because we can't really hang out in the denial stage for very long. It's going to roll us in there. And the resisting stage is only going to go so far. If we resist too many things for too long, then it becomes a performance issue. You know what I'm saying? It's really, we can hang out there for a little while as we're transitioning, but you can't camp out in any of these sections for a longer term. It's really kind of working through the speed of what you're bringing to the table, what some of your past experiences have been, what your learning style may be, how you communicate. All of those things factor into it as how we respond and our attitude toward those changes and that transition. So just kind of remember kind of pushing through that. Some tips for going through these stages. In stage one of accepting the ending is we have to let go of the past. We can honor it, but we have to, and we can grieve the ending of it, but we have to accept it. We have to kind of get through it and admit to ourselves and to other that the change is happening and that's going to occur. And that requires some honesty and authenticity with us. We have to actively seek information from sources. We have to kind of see what's happening. We have to see what's out there for us. And through that, we need to be able to make sure that we learn about the nature of the change without first judging it. Because I can guarantee you, if you sat in on Dr. June's presentation last week, and I'm talking about a lot about that presentation just because it tied in nicely when I listened to it of what this presentation was all about. But, I guarantee you a lot of people jump to conclusions about a lot of the things he said. I guarantee you there was a lot of my wheels spinning and judging the changes and the reasons why he was doing all of this, or the reason why this is going to roll out on the strategic plan, or the reason why we're doing rebranding, without really finding out, taking the time to dig into it and say, okay, why is this occurring? How is it going to benefit us? What is the need for this? Why are we doing this? So find out about the change and what prompted that, which is going to help you get through why something else is ending and we're starting something new. Take note of what's been lost, but also what's been gained. Have that different view of different is not necessarily right or wrong. It's just different. It's a new way, it's a new day, and it's a new process. Stage two of living in the neutral zone is probably the most uncomfortable stage because there's no clear ending, but no clear beginning either, as we've kind of chatted about and talked about. We have to understand we're not going to know everything. We're not going to have the complete picture during this stage, and neither are we going to be perfect. As we talked about, productivity begins to take an upswing, but we don't know everything that we should know at that point. So don't feel like you have to be perfect and knowing everything. Begin to set some short-term goals through this. Take stock of what you may need to reach those goals and what it's going to take to move you forward. A lot of that will come with communication with your leadership, to ensuring that you're on the right track, on the right path, and have the right skills to be successful during that change and that transition. And connect to your values. When you feel uncertain and confused, your personal values will provide some direction. It really is tapping into who you are as an individual, who you are as an employee. You are with SLCC, your manager and your directors hired you for that position because they felt like you had value and that you could offer something. And that is something that we need to remind ourselves of and just connect to our values of who we are during some of these times of transition and change. And then the final stage of transition is reaching your new beginning. At this stage, it's a fresh start. Utilize the clarity developed that was from the neutral zone and accept the challenge of working in the new environment. Jump right in. Start connecting, networking, finding the right people, communicating, tackling new strategies, creating new strategies for tackling problems. Find ways to mark your success. Acknowledge your small wins. Again, we talked about you're not going to be totally where you were in the neutral zone of trying to figure everything out. Acknowledge those wins as we move into this zone of transition. Acknowledge that you have made some successes, that you have made some strides. If nothing else, acknowledge the win that you've accepted the change and that we're going to that next level and that it's been implemented. Now, we want to talk a little bit as we're talking about professional development, as we're talking about changes, we're talking about transition. None of that is doable without adaptability and resilience as an employee. So keep in mind that both of these items, adaptability and resilience, are skills. And like any other skills, with practice, they can be learned, they can improve, they can be enhanced. Adaptability really is your willingness to change. It means you are able or willing to change in order to suit the new, to the different conditions that's being put upon us. Resilience is how quickly you recover or bounce back from different changes or different situations. So as we start to implement new things, as you start to use some of those new skills to combat your challenges, it may not work 100%. You may have to step back and reevaluate. That's okay. That's resilience. That's working through and pushing through. Again, these are skills that can be learned, but they're crucial during transition with you as a part of our community. Uh, for adaptability, some of the skills that you will need and to improve on, and again, all of these are learned and improvable skills. Communication. Ask for clarification during these transitions and the active listening periods. Um, Interpersonal skills, beginning to interact in a healthy and a positive way so that we avoid conflict. Start working on problem solving and critical thinking skills. Find creative solutions to challenge problems, and demonstrate that willingness. Again, demonstrate willingness. How willing are you to do this, to make adjustments and improvements? Work on your creative and strategic thinking skills. Develop those new ideas to adapt to new methods and improve strategies. So you've been giving a new challenge, you've been giving a new process, you've been giving a new reporting structure. Start figuring out ways that you can put your personal stamp on some of that. Look for ways that you can say, okay, the change is here. How can I work within this? How can I maybe take a little bit of that old, tweak it a little bit, change it up a little bit, and apply it to what now we're going through, and show some of those skills with us. Teamwork. Again, we've talked about as some of these skills, we move into some of the commitment stages. Teamwork is crucial. Ability to work on a diverse team and handle differing ideas. As we go through these stages and transitions and changes, everybody's going to see things differently. Everybody has a different perspective. And that's where it's crucial that you have these communication and personal skills. They all work together, as even the organizational skills, so that you can organize those tasks and be more effective with project management, whatever tasks that you're given. All of these work towards your adaptability as an employee. Workplace resilient. You kind of think, well, what do resilient employees do when they're faced with adversity? What sets them apart, and what do they do so differently? Honestly, when you look at some of the studies and you go out there and do some research, a lot of it is just strong connections and relationships with others, and having those support systems internally, becoming a team player that helps others achieve success, looking beyond who you are and how it's looking at the bigger goal. Having trust with others. A lot of it too is managing stress effectively and taking care of yourself, and monitoring your own thoughts when that stress and hits you. Again, I can't say this enough, be true to yourself, your values and beliefs, and perceive your work as meaningful. Perceive what you're doing as it contributes to the overall structure of SLCC, the overall goal, the overall mission, what we're trying to attain. You see yourself as a part of the influence that we have on our community. You see yourself a part of the impact that you have on your students. You see yourself as an important part of the overall strategies associated with SLCC. Uh, Put value to your work and to your position and what this will happen. A lot of it just kind of enhancing these skills at work will be positivity, taking on a positive stance, realizing how your own emotions and your behaviors and your reactions influence others, and what actions they have on others and the overall strategies associated with your own department. But also, you need to find balance in a work-life situation, because employees that are resilient and are able to bounce back need the energy to bounce back. And therefore, we need to be able to make sure that we're rested, relaxed. We take the time to recuperate and unwind. If you come into the office situation, stressed and uptight and just bound up tight, it's going to influence what you do and how you react and what your responses will be. Again, kind of finding meaning in your work and feeling that your work is contributing to everything, the greater good. And then just also do a quick internal self-reflection of what are some of your emotional triggers. What triggers your stress? What triggers those things? Be aware of those triggers, so when you're in that situation, as we talked about, being able to anticipate and address and control attitudes. So all of these things are crucial to becoming and enhancing your resiliency and adaptability skills within the workplace. I found it interesting that LinkedIn, in their top 5 soft skills needed for 2020, adaptability was ranked as 4th. So it is crucial. That's why so many employers, when you're asked, sitting in an interview, talk about adaptability to change, talk about your resilience to change, talk about how you feel about that. It's because it's one of those soft skills that they need to make sure that you're able to stretch in. Remember to stretch it in small ways, though. We're going to have to leave our comfort zone. That's the buzzword, the comfort zone. Our comfort zones are, in reality, as big or as small as we make them. We make them bigger by engaging in more activities or creating that stretch zone. So then the bigger your comfort zone is through that stretch zone, the more adaptable we will be. So you want to push yourself, take on, we've already talked about trying new things, adapting your skills, getting creative. That's part of your stretch zone. That's where you want to step out a little bit and accept some of the things and kind of push you out. And as you do that, your comfort zone will expand. So we want to make sure that you do that so that you're a more adaptable and well-rounded individual. So look for those opportunities and respond positively in situations that might otherwise make you uncomfortable. Embrace it and feel like how can you do this? Keep an open mind and controlling what you can, but staying positive when you're working on your ability to adapt and remain resilient. So push that comfort zone a little bit, step outside of it, and then before long, that stretch zone is your comfort zone. So just make sure that we're working through that because it is a highly valued a soft skill that all employers and directors and leaders are looking for. So I'm gonna post these on the website for the Center for Professional Development. But some questions that as changes are implemented, whether again it's organizationally, departmentally, whatever you're facing or whatever you face, ask you a couple of these questions so that you're familiar with the curves of change and the curves of transition. Where are you on those curves when you're faced on that? First of all, identify where you're at. And then kind of figure out what some of the key reasons are why you're there. Why are you stuck in that stage or why are you there? And how does this really kind of make you feel being in that stage on the curve? And then you want to look at what actions can I take to move forward on the curve? What can push me to that next level? What can stretch my comfort zone? What can make that area a little bit bigger? And then with that, you want to do what's holding me back from taking those actions. So you kind of identify the actions. There's always something that may be a little hesitation for you. Figure out what that is. And then ask yourself, if I wasn't worried about the consequences, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And that comes again with that comfort zone, the actions that you're going to look at, and then what small step can I take towards this? Who can I speak to talk through this further? Who can I reach out to that's going to push me and help me expand my comfort zone and move through this transition? And what am I going to do in the next 7 days with this? That I've identified some of this. What next? Give yourself those we talked about setting small goals, small short-term goals. That's a 7-day goal, short-term. What can I do to get me through that next level? And do it honestly. How committed am I to this? Am I at a 0 where I'm not committed, or am I all in at a 10? Have some of these conversations. This would be an excellent resource as you're going through a change to bring into a one-on-one with your leader. Bring into a one-on-one with your director and say, this is where I'm at. I kind of did this. What tools and resources are available to get me through this, and can you help me? I guarantee your leader would want to hear this and walk you through this for your own professional development. As you go through some of these changes, expect a reaction. Understand that there's going to be a reaction, whether it's denial, confusion, shock, excited. There's a reaction there. Accept that your feelings are the natural result of being in an uncomfortable situation. And tell yourself the truth. Allow yourself to be upset, sad, or worried. I know a lot of individuals in the workplace that feel like, well, I'm not a strong employee, or I'm not a strong leader if I'm upset or worried about this. Not true. It's a natural reaction to change. Again, we don't want to camp out there too long. We want to get help, but it's okay to feel that. Get as much information as you can about the situation and how it's going to change. Reach out to others. Talk with people you can trust about your reactions and your feelings and your experiences. Again, allow yourself time to deal with it. Allow yourself time. Everybody's going to move through things differently. And then take the time to grieve the losses that change will bring, because it's going to. It's inevitable that something's going to happen. You're going to lose some aspect of that. So respect that, understand that, and expect understand that you will have some reactions. So in closing, as we kind of wrap things up, and we're going to open it up in a minute, see if you have any additional questions or comments, or if anything was posted in the chat. The goal of this is not to get stuck in the world of change, but to move into transition where the real work can begin. So change, as we talked about, is different from transition. Change is going to happen. How we handle it is the transition part. That's how we develop our own skills. That's how we develop ourselves as professionals, of how we adapt to these situations, how resilient are we in these situations, and that's where the real work begins for us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if we had anything post in the chat room. I'm not seeing any questions. Does anybody have anything that need a little further clarity or questions on things? Everyone's good? Okay. Well, I
thank you,
appreciate.
Dr. Browning. It was a lovely session. I was going to say thank you, Dr. Browning. It was a lovely session. You delivered it very well. You know, you're a lovely speaker, but thank you so much for taking your time to present on adjusting to change. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All righty. Well, we finished up just a few minutes early, so I'm gonna give you guys about 10 minutes back of your day, and I really appreciate the sessions this morning, and have a great rest of the week.